Welcome back to Historical Quarrels, everyone. I'm your host, Tyler Eckhart. Historical Quarrels is a highly NSFW show for those who are just tuning in, despite this being part 2 of the Civil War episode. If you're just beginning to listen today, and you didn't go listen to part 1 of this, this series, then, I don't know. If I didn't say that, I don't know what to tell you. I feel like if you see part 2 of something, you definitely should probably want to go check out part 1. But yeah, no, that's on you. That's on you if I didn't warn you. That would have been your own fault. I would even felt bad. Not even slightly bad. Had you had no warning prior. Anyways, announcements for today is we are going to be going over the rest of the Civil War that I had planned. We'll be going over a couple other events that will lead into the final episode of this kind of series on America, essentially, is what I'm calling it. More of like a thesis or like a theory that I had that Republicans and Democrats all started because of a Puritan and separatist culture here in the U.S. and how that culture kind of developed and evolved into the Federalist and Anti-Federalist movement. And today will just be kind of a continuation of the results of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists going at each other's throats, which is the Civil War. Because despite slavery being a hot topic for them, it was a big part, no doubt. Most of the people in power were white and actually didn't really care as much as they should. They viewed it how, like, a lot of people view some parenting styles to be bad, you know. They're not necessarily going to go tell you, stop you from doing it or report you to the police. Some people will, but most of them back in those days didn't want to. The abolitionists would be like those people who are going to go call the cops on somebody who hears like a kid is getting spanked by their parents or something. Not necessarily the best analogy, I know, but it's the only one that I could compare like what their actual sentiments would be back in the day. And then other announcements are I'm going to be starting a mini series. Thinking about calling it Today in History. It's going to be a shorter, kind of like 5 to 10 minute episode where I just kind of go over a historical event, like, let's say it's October 30th. I'm going to be like, okay, October 30th, today in history, this happened in, 1854. And it's just an important event. Kind of a brief explanation. It's going to help me work on my humor, too. Getting my setup and then punchline, setup punchline, just to work on that as well. Because I'd like to get better at comedy. Other than that, if you have not liked or shared this episode or left a review, please go and do so. If you would like a sticker to go place somewhere, the sticker has a QR code of the show. You can place that anywhere you'd like. Well, anywhere legal. I'm not going to tell you to go do something illegal, but can't stop you if you do. But probably shouldn't. But if you could place it somewhere where it's going to get noticed and get people to, look at the QR code, maybe scan it, watch the show, that'd be great. We're all about getting growth. I'd like to get up to over 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts if possible. So that's the goal, guys. Other than that, if you haven't checked out Hard Homies podcast, please go do that. We're thinking up some merch designs right now and some merch ideas to go with it. If you guys have any ideas for merch for this show for Historical Quarrels, reach out to me and let me know. That would be great. That's all for announcements. Let's go ahead and dive right back into the Civil War. You are listening to Historical Quarrels. So, brief recap of last episode. We went over the life of Abraham Lincoln and the life of Jeffrey Davis. Good old Jeffy Davy. And then we got right into the battle at Fort Sumter. That was our last battle after we went over their lives. So here we are continuing that. We're going to start today off with the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas by Confederates. Took place on July 21st, 1861. Located near the town of Manassas in Virginia, not far from the capital of Washington, D.C., this battle was the first major land confrontation of the American Civil War. Its outcome would shatter any illusions that the war would be short or relatively bloodless. At the onset of onset of the Civil War, both sides were eager to demonstrate their strength and resolve. The Union, under the leadership of Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, aimed to launch a campaign against Confederate forces in Virginia to pave a path to Richmond, the Confederate capital, where Jeffy Davy was spending every day drinking his Swiss Southern tea. And opposing them, the Unions, was an army assembled by the Confederates under Generals Joseph E. Johnston and P.G.T. Beauregard. Many civilians, including politicians and their families, traveled from Washington, D.C. to watch the battle, confident in a swift Union victory. They came with picnics, expecting a spectacle. Legit. They thought that this rebellion was going to be fucking simple and easy to handle. Could you fucking imagine doing that? You know, I like to compare it to when Seattle thought we were really going to win the Super Bowl. And, you know, we were on the cusp of doing it, and the Confederates, are really the, I guess for Super Bowl, it was the 49ers that fucked us? But really, we fucked ourselves over by not handing it over to Lynch? Something like that. One of those teams. I want to say it was the 49ers. Or was it the Patriots? Was it Tommy Brady? Was it Tommy fucking Brady? God damn it, I can't remember. Anyways. Imagine, everyone from Seattle doing that. And, they're bringing their picnics. They're expecting it to be a super easy game. And then they watch as, the ball doesn't get handed off to Lynch for that battle. And they also watch their team, slowly get pushed back, and the other team start kicking their ass. Be a little scary. You'd feel a little sad. So Samuel Jenkins, a D.C. resident, noted in a letter, "We rode out towards Manassas, thinking to witness a grand display of northern might. Little did we know the gravity of what lay ahead." And as the two armies clashed near the banks of Bull Run, it quickly became apparent that neither side was as prepared as they had believed. Initial Union successes gave way to confusion and disorder. Confederate lines bent but did not break, bolstered by the arrival of reinforcements via the Manassas Gap Railroad and the spirited defense led by Confederate General Thomas J. Jackson. It was here that Jackson earned his famous nickname, Stonewall. As a fellow proclaimed, "There stands Jackson, like a stone wall." Weird how nicknames can just stick like that, huh? I mean, could you imagine if the guy had said, "There stands Jackson, like an erect phallus." Just because of that, we'd only know him as erect phallus Jackson instead of Stonewall Jackson. Oh, that would be wonderful. Man. I just kind of wish that's, for those nicknames that do stick, it would just be something silly like that, there goes Floppy Wiener, or there goes Dumb as Bricks Steve. I don't know. And they just become super famous. It'd be great. Anyways, by late afternoon, Confederate counterattacks began to push the Union forces back. Panic set in among the Union troops, and their organized retreat soon turned into a rout. The road back to Washington was clogged with fleeing soldiers and onlooking civilians, all scrambling to escape. Like a bunch of mice. Eleanor Thompson, a Southern sympathizer living in Virginia, described the aftermath in her diary. "The fields are littered with the detritus of battle, abandoned wagons, discarded weapons, and the wounded seeking aid. The tales of Stonewall and our boys' valor fill our hearts with pride. So much Southern pride. And I kept that pride, even when the army threw late at the night turned a bit deviant in nature. Once the boys began to rub each other's backs with oil, telling each other how well they fought out there. I had to retire to lay down, but throughout that night I heard the strangest noises of what had to have been animals grunting and yawning." The first battle of Bull Run was a wake-up call for the North. The belief in a quick end to the rebellion was shattered, and it became evident that the Confederacy was both resilient and capable. The South, on the other hand, took the victory as a sign of the justness of their cause, although it may have also fostered overconfidence. And, this is something that we see throughout history, right? The Romans, anytime they won a battle, they're like, "Oh, the gods were with me." The Christians, anytime they won a battle, "Oh, the gods were with me." It's like, no, you won a battle because the people out there, won a battle. They kicked ass. You guys obviously maneuvered good enough that you're able to, beat the other guys. That's it. I hate this idea of like, okay, so like my God's going to bolster me, but then like their God isn't going to work for some reason. Or like, oh no, we lost. So obviously we need to repent. It's like, no, you lost because the other people were just better in that moment. Simply, the Confederates were just better in that moment at Bull Run. And while Bull Run was not the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, it was a stark indicator of the fierce conflict that was to come. It showed both sides that they were in for a prolonged, brutal struggle that would demand significant sacrifices. Right, and then we get into the Trent Affair. In the early stages of the Civil War, maintaining European neutrality, especially that of the powerful British Empire, was crucial for both the Union and the Confederacy. The Trent Affair, occurring in November of 1861, threatened to disrupt this delicate balance, bringing the United States and the United Kingdom to the brink of war. The incident began with the Confederate decision to send envoys James Mason and John Slidell to Europe. Their mission? Secure official recognition for the Confederate States of America and negotiate potential alliances. And to reach their destination, they first traveled to neutral Cuba, then boarded the British mail steamer RMS Trent for passage to Europe. And then on November 8th, 1861, the USS San Jacinto, commanded by Union Captain Charles Wilkes, intercepted the Trent, acting on intelligence regarding Mason and Slidell's mission. That's right. There's fucking spies back in the 1860s, basically. Or like little sneaky snakes. Everyone's been using, I guess counterintelligence really to fight wars for a long time. I mean, I think, even back in like Roman days, back in Greece even, there was counterintelligence. I mean, that's why the Battle of Marathon was so important. It was to get a message that the Persians were invading. And it's just getting that information to people, and that's all you have to do. And so the fact that they were able to do that is what allowed them to stop this potential catastrophe from happening to the Union. Wilkes took the audacious step of boarding the British vessel, arresting the Confederate diplomats, and bringing them to the United States as prisoners of war. Now, news of the incident caused an uproar on both sides of the Atlantic. Thomas Edwards, a British merchant, wrote in a letter dated November 25th, 1861, kind of, exemplifying these feelings. He said, "The audacity of the Americans to seize all ship and take prisoners from the protection of the Union Jack. The streets of London are a-buzzing with indignation. I haven't been this upset since I came home and found my beloved cat, Sir Priscles, dead by the hands of my wife. Who said I gave Sir Priscles more love and attention than her? Of course I did, you bitch! Sir Priscles was the only one who understood who I really was on the inside. He was the only one that truly understood that I too am a cat, and knew my real name, Dapper Nightshade Sparkles." Britain viewed the boarding and arrests as a flagrant violation of maritime law, and a direct affront to British neutrality. London quickly dispatched 8,000 troops to Canada in preparation for a potential conflict, and delivered a stern ultimatum to Washington: release the envoys and offer a formal apology or face war. And now, of course, like this would, kind of freak out Lincoln's administration a bit. They were already dealing with the Civil War and a bunch of other shit. And because they were grappling with that rebellion at home, they recognized the gravity of the situation. And Secretary of State William H. Seward was central in managing the crisis. Lincoln, understanding the importance of maintaining the Union's focus on the Confederacy without adding another front to the war, reportedly quipped, "One war at a time." Smart man right there. He knew that you're not going to be fighting a war on two fronts here. That'd be a real stupid fucking decision. And so by December, after tense deliberations, the U.S. government decided to release Mason and Slidell, framing the decision as a gesture of goodwill and not and not a response to British demands. In his communication, Seward subtly criticized Captain Wilkes for not following proper procedures, thus providing a face-saving rationale for the release. Which is so government, you know. Yeah, you just throw someone under the bus. And I guess in this case, it was to avoid a war with Britain, which, you know, poor Captain Wilkes, but goddamn. I know, that's just what happens a lot, though. It's like, oh, this soldier undermined our actions and went against code. And, you know, it's not our fault. It's just we're going to discipline him. Don't worry. God, I feel like, yeah, that just happens too much and more, especially recently. Anyways, Margaret Clark, a resident of Boston, noted in her journal on December 28, 1861. The papers today say Southern diplomats ought to be released. Better to avoid conflict. Further conflict, I suppose. We have enough trouble on our hands. And while the Trent Affair was a diplomatic near miss, it showcased the global ramifications of the American Civil War. The crisis also emphasized the importance of careful diplomacy during the conflict, as both the Union and the Confederacy sought to support from powerful European nations. The swift resolution of the affair demonstrated the Lincoln administration's pragmatic approach to foreign policy, prioritizing the primary goal of preserving the Union and not fighting a war on two fronts. I mean, it's honestly a good thing Britain didn't decide they wanted America to be under its control again during this time, you know, because they probably could have taken back at least some of the land, and America would look pretty fucking different today, especially if they really wanted to, since America was fighting itself. There's actually a story of a foreign invasion somewhat occurring from pro-Confederate British sympathizers who would hijack the Union steamer Chesapeake and would escape the consequences for it through some Canadian guy who sympathized with the Confederates as well, some racist Canadian dude. So yeah. It's an interesting little tidbit, not too big of a story, but might get into it later. Might even do like a little mini episode on it sometime. So that'd be cool. And then one of the most transformative pieces of legislation in American history, the Homestead Act of 1862, was signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln on May 20th, 1862. This act would play a significant role in shaping the American West, embodying the concept of manifest destiny, and promising opportunity and prosperity to those willing to brave the frontier and death, destruction, and getting their homes robbed from anyone who wasn't white. So, you know, that fucking sucked. The act offered 160 acres of public land virtually free of charge to any U.S. citizen or intended citizen who was the head of a household. In return, homesteaders were required to build a dwelling, cultivate a portion of the land, and reside on the property for 5 years, after which the land would be theirs outright, provided they had met the conditions. So you have to go out there, get the land, and then cultivate that shit, turn it into something fucking useful. Jonathan Myers, an aspiring homesteader from Ohio, wrote in a letter to his brother in June 1862. The promise of land out west is a dream come true. We packed our belongings and will be heading to Nebraska territory. If all goes well, we'll have a place to call our own in 5 years. The children are excited, and so am I. I just wish my wife Harriet was still here. Her death still haunts me every night. I can hear her screams in dreams, and the name she screamed out while being devoured by that thing. William Bradford! William Bradford! No one knows William Bradford. Why did she scream his name? Why? Yeah, so William Bradford's still haunting people. If you don't understand that joke, just go listen to America's Origins, the first episode of the series, and continue from there. Because I will reference it a little more. It is a recurring character, so enjoy. The allure of owning land, obviously, like that part at the end about, you know, Harriet and his like wife being dead, not real. But the other part was real. So realize if someone says something goofy in a letter they wrote, I most likely took an actual letter and then just wrote something goofy. So just there might be one or two times where I have to actually say, no, they legit said this. So yeah. Only twice, really, I think, in this episode I'll have to do that. Anyways, continuing. The allure of owning land drew a diverse group of settlers. Farmers seeking more extensive and fertile grounds, former slaves yearning for a fresh start post-emancipation, immigrants searching for the promise of the American dream, and countless others. The act was also instrumental in encouraging the construction of railroads, which facilitated the movement of people and goods across the vast expanse of the continent. However, the westward expansion and the promise of free land were not without complications. Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for generations were systematically displaced, leading to a series of conflicts, misunderstandings, and forced relocations. Events that really paint a picture about how fucking shitty a lot of our ancestors were, if you're white, to people. People who had lived there their entire lives. They were like, hey, get the fuck out. That's my land now. President said it's mine. And the natives were like, we didn't sign any fucking treaty. So, yeah, that happened quite a bit. So the challenges of frontier life were daunting. Harsh weather conditions, isolation, difficult soil, and the lack of basic amenities tested the resolve of many settlers. Yet many persisted, driven by the allure of land ownership and the independence it promised, which I totally get. I wonder how many of us today would also be willing to survive harsh conditions now for land, just with how fucking expensive it is. Like, what if the U.S. promised everyone that moves to Alaska gets land for like $1 per acre in some desolate part of Alaska? I'm talking like it is literally just snow. But you get like 10 acres for $1. I mean, I might take that deal. Fuck, that's not a bad deal. But the issue is we'd have to figure out how to turn that land into something usable. I am curious how fast we would, populate and bend that environment to our will, though. I mean, think about how fast we could do that if we got enough people out there who had to do it to survive. I'm talking like, you don't bend this land, to your will. Everyone that moved out there is dying. I bet you if enough humans got together, it'd go quick. I think it would take 5-10 years tops to bend Alaska completely to our submission. And I really do think a certain element of do or die is what causes people to do nigh miraculous things. So, anyways, by the time the act was repealed in 1976 and 1986 in Alaska, approximately 1.6 billion homestead applications had been processed and 270 million acres, which about 10% of all U.S. lands, had been distributed to individuals. The legacy of the Homestead Act is vast. Beyond the physical transformation of the American landscape, it fostered a spirit of resilience, individualism, and opportunity to fuck over natives in the same way they had already been doing for the past few hundred years at that point. So, they loved that opportunity. They loved taking every chance they could to take a shot at them. Okay, and then on September 17th, 1862, near the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, and the meandering Antietam Creek, the armies of the Union and Confederacy clashed in what would become the single bloodiest day of battle in American history. The Battle of Antietam, or the Battle of Sharpsburg, as it was known in the South, was a turning point in the Civil War, not just for its staggering casualty numbers, but for the political ramifications it held in its aftermath. Union General George B. McClellan's army of the Potomac faced off against Confederate General Robert E. Lee's army of Northern Virginia. The battle was marked by brutal and relentless combat, with troops fighting in the cornfield, at Dunkerchurch, and around the Sunken Road, later termed Bloody Lane, for the gruesome scene of death and destruction. William Harris, a Union soldier, wrote in his diary dated September 18th, 1862. The sights and sounds of yesterday's battle are forever etched in my mind. The cornfield was a place of unspeakable horror, with bodies stacked upon bodies. Men I'd dined with the night before now lifeless. The sight of corn stalks still haunts my waking dreams. I can see them, those corn stalks looming menacingly. You may laugh, but I dare you to stay one night in this maze of horror and then laugh. I swear one day these corn mazes will be used to demonstrate the horrors in this war. I swear it will be done. And what's interesting is William Harris would later go on to invent the first corn maze, or like the kind of scary corn mazes. Though it wouldn't be called a corn maze until 1993 when Don France and Adrian Fisher would name it that. William would first call his idea a husk labyrinth. And every fall, he would invite the local residents out to his corn farm where he would have them spend the night in there. And he would go out and make random noises throughout the night, which supposedly sounded similar to what he experienced during the battle. Most of the community would sleep just fine, though. And some of the children would be scared. Like the kids would be a little frightened by it, but it actually became such a beloved tradition by the community, they began to pay William to stay in the cornfield. And so William began the idea of instead just having them stay the night, he turned his corn farm into a labyrinth and like an actual maze, and began growing his corn into different maze patterns every year. Just kind of changed it up. And then would lead people to the start and have them try to reach the end of the labyrinth in under an hour. And that was the goal, right? It's just a little game. And besides boosting his corn sales, again, he began making more and more money off of people paying him to go into it. And it would continue on for years until eventually he was caught kidnapping some of the children that would get lost in the corn maze. And he was eventually executed via a firing squad for having committed some unspeakable acts to these kids. Back to the battle, though. By day's end, the two sides had suffered a combined total of around 23,000 casualties. Killed, wounded, or missing. Which is insane to me. Though the battle concluded without a decisive victory. In one day, 23,000 people. I mean, I guess that's nothing compared to World War I, right? But still, fuck, dude, that's a lot. Especially if you're like just one country fighting itself. That's crazy. Anyways. Though the battle concluded without a decisive victory for either side, Lee's retreat to Virginia gave the Union a strategic advantage, marking the end of the Confederate Army's first invasion into the North. The aftermath of the Antietam had significant implications. President Abraham Lincoln had been waiting for a Union success on the battlefield to announce a bold, transformative measure, the Emancipation Proclamation. Although Antietam was not a clear-cut victory, it was enough of a turning point for Lincoln to feel justified in making his announcement. 5 days after the battle, on September 22nd, he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that, as of January 1st, 1863, all enslaved individuals in the rebellious states shall be thenceforward and forever free. Which, good on him. Good on him. That's, it's definitely going to help them. And hopefully, not just lead them all to fucking die. No, I mean, it was going to help him. But you probably should have implemented some other measures first, too, just to make sure that they were safe. Anyways, Mary Elizabeth Bowser, a freed slave and Union spy, remarked in a letter to a friend, "The proclamation gives hope. Even if it does not free us all now, it is a big step towards the dawn of a new day." The Battle of Antietam, with its unparalleled bloodshed, shifted the course of the Civil War. No longer was the conflict solely about preserving the Union. It was now also a war to end the institution of slavery. The international implications were significant too. European powers, particularly the British and French, who had been contemplating recognizing the Confederacy, were given pause. Supporting a nation fighting explicitly for the perpetuation of slavery became a more challenging proposition. Mainly because by that point, both England and France had essentially abolished slavery. Like, they were kind of done with it. They didn't like it. France did that like back in the 1300s. Britain wouldn't do that until around the 1700s, which is actually why they would get some support from slaves during the Battle of the Revolution. But that's a whole other thing too. And so, them being like, oh, yeah, we're going to support the Confederacy. At first, the idea was, the central government's just overstepping their bounds and, is trying to force these southern states into obeying a more central government, kind of that system. Whereas now the narrative kind of flipped on its head. It was like, oh, no, they're fighting to end slavery. That wasn't the case at all at first. Maybe that was some abolitionists' goals. Really, the whole case was the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were just fighting. And that's all it was for until this moment. And this is why it's so important, because in many ways, the events of that fateful September day reverberated far beyond the fields of Maryland, and it shaped the nation's future in a bunch of different ways. Also, it wouldn't lead to William Harris inventing corn mazes and then abducting children from them. If you fell for that, don't feel bad. I literally have gotten my wife to buy into that narrative for an entire week now. She straight up thinks there's some guy named William Harris who invented corn mazes and kidnapped and then committed violent acts on kids. I didn't describe what the acts were to her, but I was just like, yeah, they were violent. And I have not told her that it isn't true yet. So I'm really hoping that when we go out to the corn maze later this week, that she's going to tell one of our friends that there's this guy named William Harris and act like it's a fact. I will record it. I might post it on Patreon. So if you, quick little side note here, if you're liking what you hear and you want more content from me, go sign up for our Patreon. The link will be available in the show's description. Anyways, yeah, I just, I really hope that gets treated like fact by my friends. And I'm not going to tell her also until everyone is gone, just so I can see how many more people is going to fall for this fake fact. You know, a matter of fact, let's spread this misinformation. Let's spread it like super hard and get a whole bunch of people to think there's this guy named William Harris who invented the corn maze and then used it to kidnap children. If I come across that randomly online, I'm going to be so happy and so proud of you guys. So please go do that. Anyways, on January 1st, 1863, amidst the raging tumult of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln issued a transformative and pivotal document, the Emancipation Proclamation. Though it may have been announced during the, Battle of Antietam, this is when it takes effect, right? Though the proclamation did not immediately free every enslaved person in the U.S., its significance was profound, both symbolically and practically. The proclamation stated, "All persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free." This decree applied only to the states that had seceded from the Union, leaving slavery untouched in the loyal border states and specific Union-held areas in the South. Still, it fundamentally shifted the character of the war and aimed a mortal blow at the institution of slavery. Very good thing. But again, didn't fix all the issues. It was just like, yeah, so everyone that's like in the rebellion states, you guys are free. You can get the fuck out of there. But people who haven't rebelled against us, you get to keep your slaves for like a little bit longer, okay? Like, listen, you got to keep them. That's your little reward. You get them for like 2 more months. So, in a letter penned to his wife on January 3rd, Samuel Mitchell, a Union soldier, expressed his sentiments. "We now fight not only to preserve our Union, but to end the great moral stain of slavery. This proclamation gives our battle a higher purpose." And for the African American community, both enslaved and free, the proclamation was received with a mixture of jubilation and cautious optimism, which is fair. I mean, I wouldn't trust that shit either, and they were justified by not trusting it, and still are justified in not trusting what our government has implemented for them. Because, think about it. Think about how they get fucked over to this day. To this day, they still get fucked over quite a bit, just for the color of their skin. Because of some dumb verse in the Bible in Genesis. And it's the wrong fucking people, too. They're not the descendants of Canaan, or whatever the fuck his name is. So dumb. So dumb. Anyways. Churches across the North held vigils. And as the clock struck midnight on January 1st, the gatherings erupted in joyous celebration. It was a right step forward overall. However, the Emancipation Proclamation had its critics. Many in the North, especially Democrats, who were already wary of the war's expansion, felt Lincoln had overstepped his bounds, and some questioned the proclamation's legality, while others felt it would only prolong the conflict. And despite the debates and controversies, it really did have immediate and tangible effects in the war effort, right? Thousands of African Americans, now with a clear stake in the Union's victory, joined the army. And it really bolstered their ranks, right? Imagine getting just like a couple extra 1,000 guys to help you go fuck over some other people. Of course it's going to help you. It's great. But really for them supporting the Union, it was kind of like the lesser of two evils for them, since the North was still pretty fucking racist. It really was the inverse of a Sophie's choice. The modern day example would be you choosing to hang out with your grandpa, who says certain words without thinking about their context. You know, he isn't necessarily he doesn't hate people of color, but he definitely doesn't think about their feelings and considers them to be on the same level as him, which is still pretty fucking racist. Or instead of hanging out with him, you can go hang out with a clan, someone who's in the clan for an afternoon, who actually hates other races, legit hates them. That was their choice for African Americans back then. Sucks. Shitty choice. Should have gone back on a boat to France. They would have been fine. The proclamation added a moral dimension to the Union's cause, making it clear that a Northern victory would spell the end of slavery. And it garnered support from abolitionists and shifted international opinion, making it nearly impossible for European nations to recognize or support a Confederacy fighting for the preservation of slavery. Again, because they had already done away with that shit, and they're like, I don't really want to be involved in that anymore. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into the Battle of Gettysburg now. From July 1st to the 3rd, 1863, in the small Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg, the fate of the American nation was fiercely contested. The Battle of Gettysburg was not only the largest engagement of the American Civil War, but is also widely regarded as its turning point. Over 3 days, Union and Confederate forces clashed with ferocity, and the outcome would dramatically alter the trajectory of the war. The battle commenced when Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee encountered a Union cavalry division led by Major General John Buford. The initial Confederate advance was repelled, but as more troops from both sides converged on the town, the tide of the battle ebbed and flowed. Isaac McDaniel, a Confederate infantryman, wrote to his brother on July 2nd. The land is scarred with cannon fire and littered with the fallen. The smoke is so thick at times, one can hardly see a man 5 paces away. Our boys pressed on with determination, but the Yankees stand firm as my fellow Confederate brothers in their supple, juicy hamstrings. I long for their touch and goodnight kisses. Each night I pray that every one of them survives the day to make it back for our little ritual. One day, brother, perhaps you will understand what true brotherly camaraderie is when you enlist in the war effort. It is every soldier's duty to ensure that their fellow man was able to come at least twice in a day before they step into battle. May God bless us. Many in my regiment have heard tell that we will be advancing upon the Union line on the morrow. We have decided that this may very well be the last night of our lives, and have thus made the choice that tonight we will throw out all cares to the side and cast off our garments, and be with one another. I know many of the men have yearned for the soft touch of many of our drummer boys, who they say look prettier than a woman, and I have to agree with them. There is one drummer boy, in particular, by the name of Timmy. I and many of my fellow brothers have decided that we will take him first. I am positive that he will be an excellent lay, though that remains to be seen. But I have imagined placing him between me and my good pal Robert, also known as Billy. The way we would do this is by me entering little Timmy, who is 18 by the way, through his rear, and at the same time having Billy enter Timmy through his mouth. We were discussing these plans. When we were discussing these plans, there were a few others who wanted to join, and suggested little Timmy does have 2 hands, and could theoretically pleasure at least 2 more during this. Well, you see, we initially wanted to call what Billy and I were doing a spit roast, but now we aren't sure what to call this, so we've decided upon the name of Drawn and Quartered, hence the 4-man and the 1 drummer boy. Just kind of pulling him at different parts and pulling him apart really slowly.
After we finished this position, we thought it might be fun to release our seed upon little Timmy's face. All at once, one of our fellow soldiers from the Orient says that this was a common practice in his land called bukkake. Should I live up tomorrow, I shall be glad to regale you with a tale of how this went. I know many of those in my regiment will be doing the same. We may end up in a group pile of over 1,000 men losing themselves to pleasure. Love, Isaac.
By the second day, Union forces commanded by General George G. Meade had formed a defensive fishhook line on Cemetery Ridge, and the adjacent peaks. Fierce battles erupted at places like Little Round Top, where Union forces made a desperate stand and held their ground. On the third day, Lee ordered a massive assault on the center of the Union line, known as Pickett's Charge. Approximately 12,500 Confederate soldiers advanced across an open field for nearly a mile under intense artillery and rifle fire. That would have made me shit my fucking bricks, dude. A mile of people shooting and fucking bomb, those steel balls just exploding and hitting up ground and earth beneath you as you're trying to walk across this field. Fuck that. A Union artilleryman, Eli Perkins, recounted the moment. As the rebel line came on, it seemed impossible any could survive the hailstorm of shot and shell, but still they pressed forward, determined, until our fire grew to withering. It was strange. As we fired, we could see some of the men fall down weeping as they lost their fellow infantrymen, seemingly weeping and kissing the deceased bodies. The South must have a strange regiment for how they forge bonds amongst themselves. Talk about Southern pride. The charge was repulsed with over 50% casualties, and it marked the end of the battle, with Lee's army in retreat. Isaac was among those casualties. The Battle of Gettysburg resulted in an estimated 51,000 casualties over those 3 days, making it the deadliest battle of the Civil War. Again, over 3 days, so it wasn't like the one day where we lost 23,000 people. So, technically a little less than what was lost in the Battle of Antietam, so that's important to note. President Abraham Lincoln would later memorialize the battle and its significance in his Gettysburg Address on November 19th, 1863. Standing on the hallowed ground of the Soldiers' National Cemetery, Lincoln eloquently spoke of the fallen. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, that all men shall, by God's given right, be able to clap the cheeks of whatever man they choose, and it shall not be considered gay as long as the penises don't touch. Amen. Last part might not have been exactly what he said, but we can pretend. In the larger narrative of the Civil War, Gettysburg is often viewed as the moment when the momentum irrevocably shifted in favor of the Union. While there were many more battles to be fought before the war's conclusion, Gettysburg marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. This is where they were on that decline. They got up there and they were kind of pushing back a little bit, but then the Union was like, okay, time to fuck them. And that's what they did. Lee's march really fucked them. And by the way, the whole drummer boy bit, totally a real thing, by the way. Maybe not the story I made up. So maybe Isaac was a real person and he did send a letter. But during the Civil War, since men outnumbered women, they would fuck their drummer boys and fellow soldiers. I shit you not. I'm not even kidding. If you're curious about where I'm getting that fact from, it will be in the show notes for today's episode. You can go take a look. But it was a real thing. I was surprised too when I found it out, and that's why I kind of have been doing the whole Southern Pride. But they really like Pride Month. Good on them. They love the LGBTQ crowd, or maybe they don't because they're closeted. But yeah, it was interesting. It was a fun little fact, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play into this. It's gonna get played into. Okay, and then in 1863 we have the siege of Vicksburg. So situated atop a high bluff overlooking a sharp bend in the Mississippi River, Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a strategic stronghold for the Confederacy. Its formidable defenses made it a tough nut to crack for Union forces. The siege of Vicksburg from May 18th to July 4th, 1863, was a crucial campaign that, together with the Battle of Gettysburg, marked a significant turning point in the Civil War. Union Major General Ulysses S. Grant, yeah, you guys all know him, he was a president later, recognized the importance of Vicksburg. Capturing the city would split the Confederacy in two and grant the Union full control of the Mississippi River, a vital transportation and supply route. However, Vicksburg's defenses, both natural and man-made, posed a daunting challenge. From the diary of a Confederate soldier, Robert Holloway, on May 22nd, we have him saying, "The Yankees have tried to take the city head-on and have been repulsed with vigor. Vicksburg remains a thorn in their side, and our boys are determined to hold it to the last. I swear I will avenge Isaac and that sweet ass of his if it's the last thing I do." Again, just the funny bits are not real. I'll remind you guys as much as I need to. Rather than launching a direct assault, which had failed previously, Grant decided on a siege. Union forces encircled the city, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. As days turned into weeks, the situation for the Confederate defenders, and the civilians trapped inside grew increasingly dire. Lucinda Brent, a resident of Vicksburg, wrote in a letter, "The constant bombardment is unbearable. Buildings crumble, and the ground shakes incessantly. Food is scarce. We've resorted to eating mules and rats. Despair hangs over us like a dark cloud." Grant tightened the noose, using naval forces to bombard the city from the river and positioning artillery on the surrounding heights. The constant bombardment, combined with dwindling supplies, took a severe toll on the city's defenders and inhabitants. And finally, on July 4th, 1863, Confederate Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, again, this is a day after the Battle of Gettysburg, too, by the way, just so you realize, surrendered Vicksburg to Grant. The surrender came just a day after the Union victory of Gettysburg, providing a double cause for celebration in the North. Capture of Vicksburg was a masterstroke for the Union. With it, they effectively controlled the entire Mississippi River, and they divided the Confederacy, and they cut off Texas, Arkansas, and parts of Louisiana from the rest. That is so good for going against an enemy, right? If you are able to split them up so that way they can't get their supplies to each other and they're forced to, just have those the two halves try and do what they can without each other. Oh, man. Oh, I'd be like, I'm trying to think of like another comparison to it. It'd be like if like today someone went and cut off, the western eastern half of the U.S. from each other, just so we couldn't like send troops. But then again, we have so many troops that would just kind of, they'd be fucked either way if they tried to do a land invasion here. I don't know. I'll think of something later. It doesn't matter. President Lincoln famously remarked, because of this masterstroke, "The father of waters again goes unvexed to the sea," remarking about the Mississippi. The success of Vicksburg significantly boosted Grant's reputation, positioning him as one of the leading Union generals. More broadly, the victory demonstrated the North's resolve and capability, which, it further tilted the balance of the war in the Union's favor. Vicksburg, along with Gettysburg, marked the beginning of a series of Union victories that would ultimately lead to the end of the Civil War. We're talking massive fucking blows to morale here. We're talking these Southern assholes had their dicks hard, and then they get fucked over like this, and they're like, "God damn, why was my dick hard?" It's like when you get done masturbating a bit, and you're like, "Oh, that video was," like in the moment, you're like, "Oh yeah, this is hot," and then you think about like the context of the video, and you're like, "You know what? Maybe your stepsister getting stuck in a dryer, and then it's not all that cool, honestly. What's wrong with me?" Kind of like that for the South after these two battles. Okay. And then we have the draft riots that would happen in New York City. So in the sweltering summer of 1863, amid the backdrop of the Civil War's widening scope and mounting casualties, the streets of New York City became a battleground of a different sort. The draft riots, which took place between July 13th and the 16th, again, only a few weeks after, 10 days after Vicksburg and Gettysburg, when the Union was, definitely trying to, they had reason to celebrate. This shit still went on. These riots stand as one of the most violent and tumultuous episodes of domestic unrest in American history. I'm talking like this is real bad. Real fucking bad. The immediate cause was the Enrollment Act, passed in March 1863. The act required the registration of all males between the ages of 20 and 45, making them eligible for the draft. However, a provision allowed for draftees to pay a $300 commutation fee or hire a substitute to avoid service. This clause was viewed by many, especially the working class and Irish immigrant communities, as favoring the wealthy, effectively allowing them to buy their way out of fighting, which is 100% true. That's exactly what it was. And luckily, completely stopped after these riots. Because, plenty of rich people go to war nowadays. It totally happens. And they for sure don't get away with draft dodging, like ever, dude. Like, fucking wild, bro. Crazy. That'd be like fucking crazy if like a country just kept letting that happen. Even on like today's times. That totally doesn't happen here. Can't tell I'm being sarcastic. Of course that fucking happens here. From the Journal of Patrick O'Rourke, a doc writer who dated July 12th, he says, "The draft is nothing but a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. Why should I go and risk my life while the wealthy can just pay their way out? It's injustice, pure and simple." And I was going to try and do an Irish accent, but I couldn't think of like how to do one in the moment. So, anyways, you fucking tell him, Patrick O'Rourke, O'Houlihan, O'Donnell, O'Malley, O'Connell, O'Sullivan. Great fucking name. The riots erupted on July 13th, beginning as an initially peaceful protest against the draft lottery. However, it quickly escalated into a violent upheaval. Mobs rampaged through the streets, attacking draft offices, government buildings, and private properties. They also targeted, you guessed it, Black New Yorkers, so African Americans, and institutions that served the Black community, which was a reflection of racial tensions and resentment over fears that freed slaves would compete for jobs. Compete for jobs. Of course they're going to compete for jobs, dude. Like, everyone needs to get a job, and, businesses don't need everyone to work for them. It's just so wild to me that this whole sentiment of, "they're gonna take your jobs," came from the fucking Irish, which kind of makes sense. And then it also makes sense why the Irish would continue after they created the police force, brutalizing the Black community. It all started in fucking New York. Of course it did. This mentality has existed for this long here in America, which is so wild to me. "They're gonna take your jobs." Oh, God. And also, again, it proved my point that Black Americans truly had to pick the lesser of two white evil devils in their situation. They were fucked, really, either way. But in one way, they were slightly less fucked. Terrible. Margaret Thompson, a school teacher, wrote in a letter, "The city is consumed by madness. They dragged a poor Black man from his home and beat him senseless in the street. The air is thick with anger and smoke as buildings burn." The rioters' fury was indiscriminate. They targeted not just symbols of the draft, but also anyone or anything associated with the Union war effort, Republican rule, or the perceived empowerment of Black Americans. New York's police force, overwhelmed by the size and ferocity of the mobs, fought valiantly but struggled to restore order. It wasn't until several regiments of Union troops, fresh from the Battle of Gettysburg, arrived in the city that the violence was suppressed. All right, these fuckers who just witnessed Gettysburg and, all of their friends dying in the war had to come back and stop people from rioting about the war that they fought to, preserve their freedom. And I don't know. Well, not even really preserve, I guess, white people's freedoms, but really to preserve the central government and to stop states from just seceding and tyrannical rule from state governors to, them form their own countries, essentially. That's what they're stopping, which is good. America needs to be unified and whole, in my opinion. The aftermath was grim. Estimates of the death toll range from 100 to 1,200, with many more injured. That's right, 1,200 fucking people dying, guys. And extensive property damage as well on top of that. The Black community in New York was particularly affected, with many of them choosing to flee the city altogether. I do not blame them. I would have booked it the fuck out of there as well. Worst part is they couldn't even reliably go to native tribes without also getting enslaved by them. That's right. Native Americans, not all of them, some of the tribes did have African American slaves. How fucked is that? It's so sad. Just there's always this issue in history that you'll see repeatedly come up of the suppressed becoming an oppressor. Or they're oppressing other people that they can oppress when they're being suppressed by people that they can't oppress. It's a feeling of empowerment that seems to be almost, I don't want to call it natural in humans, but at this point, it fucking seems natural that if you get suppressed, you want to then oppress in response to make you feel like you have some measure of control because you're able to control someone else. It's just really sad. And I don't know. Yeah. Honestly, for Black Americans during this time, their best bet would have been sailing to France, hoping they wouldn't get captured by Dutch or Canadians while escaping. That's, that was their best bet. And actually, quite a few did migrate to France. The draft riots laid bare deep-seated social and racial tensions in the North, showing that the divides of the Civil War were not merely geographical. This was the sentiment felt in a lot of Americans at the time. They, a lot of them did feel that they were superior to Black people for no fucking reason. Again, no justifiable reason other than, oh, look, their people were, I don't know, less technologically advanced than me. But in all reality, they weren't. They just, some of them are. Some of the tribes were when they came in, but only not even by that much. Had they discovered certain materials sooner, they might have been more suited and been able to, get as technologically advanced and adept as we were I shouldn't say we, those people were when they went and, took over. But anyways, the unrest underscored the complexities and challenges faced by the Union, both on the battlefield and on the home front, as it sought to preserve the nation and end the institution of slavery. Which, again, that narrative was only started because of Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation to kind of keep fucking Britain and France out of their way. So in the late stages of the Civil War, as the Union sought to deliver decisive blows to the Confederacy, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman embarked on a campaign that would be remembered both for its military significance and its brutal tactics. Sherman's March to the Sea, a 285-mile trek from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, was characterized by its scorched earth approach, aiming to cripple the South both economically and psychologically. And I'll tell you what, I am a big fan of Sherman's tactics, to be honest. The man was brutal and efficient in his approach to this shit. I am talking, he did kind of what he had to do to the South. The South fucking, they needed this to learn, hey, this is how you're going to get your ass kicked. It's going to be brutal. Sherman, having captured Atlanta in September of 1864, set his sights on the heart of Georgia. He believed that by waging hard war and destroying the South's resources, he could break the Confederacy's will to fight and hasten the war's end, he was correct with this. On November 15th, he set out with approximately 60,000 men, cutting a swath of destruction that was often 60 miles wide. That's right. 60 miles wide, straight to the heart of Georgia. A journal entry from Elijah Hunt, a Georgia farmer, dated December 1st, 1864, reads, "We awoke to find Sherman's men on our land. They took our livestock, burnt our barn, and left our fields in ruins. All around, smoke rises from neighboring farms. It feels like the end of the world." Sherman's troops lived off the land, foraging for food and supplies. They destroyed railways, bridges, and telegraph lines, ensuring the Confederacy could not easily resupply or communicate. More than just strategic targets, they burned homes, mills, and crops, aiming to annihilate the South's economic base. Which, if you want to win a war, that's what you gotta do sometimes. When the other is your enemy, and I'm talking the plural other, you are not fighting for their people. You are fighting to destroy them, for the most part. You need to know when you can leverage an alliance, but when you destroy, you fucking destroy. Don't even leave a trace of hope in those people's hearts, or they will rise up against you again. Alexander the Great understood this and was quite efficient as well. And like, he knew when to like leverage an alliance. Alexander the Great arguably was better at like getting alliances and, getting people to be okay with his rule. But he knew how to be fucking brutal, and he knew it was necessary. It's necessary sometimes, a lot of times in war, and it should be, in my opinion. So that way we remember that it shouldn't be the solution to a lot of our conflicts. Louisa Mitchell, a Savannah resident, wrote in a letter, "The Yankees march onward, leaving only desolation in their wake. Their drums and songs can be heard from a distance, a haunting reminder of their approach. We live in constant fear, not just of the Yankees, but of our men coming home with the drummer boys and leaving us women for their parents' softer touch. My husband has already written me on 2 occasions admitting to having done acts I thought only he and I were to share. My only relief is that Sherman and his men will probably kill me before I need to bear the weight of that knowledge at the end of this war." So sad. Drummer boys. And then them tight Southern buses. Of course, those Southern Confederates needed them. God damn. And by December 21st, Sherman's army reached Savannah. Finding it lightly defended, they quickly captured the city. Sherman, in a message to President Lincoln, offered Savannah as a Christmas gift. That's right. He's like, "Here's a Christmas gift, butter." The psychological impact of Sherman's march was profound. Many Southerners felt a deep sense of despair and hopelessness, realizing the war might be unwinnable. The North, on the other hand, was emboldened. Sherman's tactics, though controversial, were seen by many as necessary to end the conflict. It really was, too. I mean, could you imagine if we fought a war and, I don't know, we're just like, "Ooh, sorry, I need to take this spot, and don't mind me." We would lose so goddamn fast. War is hell, and war will take everything from you. And that is what it has to be. So we as humans eventually learn war should never be the solution if possible. I think that's the only way we can really learn that. If we keep war being as brutal as fucking possible, we'll learn that, hey, maybe we should look for other ways to resolve this conflict. I like espionage. I prefer espionage and taking out leaders who are a little fucking crazy. And it's just going to be a back and forth of espionage. I'm fine with that. Secret wars are better as opposed to actual wars. But sharing is hard, I guess. So looking at you, Middle East. Can't fucking do that. Sherman's march to the sea epitomized the concept of total war. It was a strategy designed to destroy not just the Confederate Army, but the very fabric of Southern society. The march left a scar on the American South, reshaping its landscape and leaving marks that would take generations to heal. And then in 1864, we have Lincoln's re-election. And the election stands out as a momentous occasion in American history, occurring amidst the backdrop of a nation torn asunder by civil war. Incumbent President Abraham Lincoln, seeking a second term, was challenged by his former general George B. McClellan. The election's outcome would significantly shape the direction and ultimate conclusion of the Civil War. Lincoln's first term had seen its share of controversies and trials. While the Emancipation Proclamation had declared freedom for slaves in Confederate-held territories, the war's immense casualties and the slow progress of the Union armies led many to question Lincoln's leadership. Because they were all thinking, the war should have been over during that first battle. They should have just been able to go quash the rebellion. But you gotta realize, there are armies down south too. They built militias all over the fucking place. God damn. And so with the faction of the Democratic Party advocating for an immediate peace with the Confederacy, Lincoln's re-election was anything but certain. A diary entry by Eliza Whitman, a nurse from Massachusetts, dated October 5th, 1864, captures the sentiment. "The hospital is filled with wounded men, and their stories of suffering shake my very soul. But we must preserve, for a union divided cannot stand. I pray that Mr. Lincoln is given another term to see this through." George McClellan, although a war Democrat who supported continuing the fight, was chosen as the Democratic candidate, partly because he was seen as a moderate between the two party factions. McClellan's platform, however, was crafted by the party's peace wing, calling for immediate ceasefire negotiations with the Confederacy. Benjamin Fowler, a soldier in the Union Army, wrote in his letter to his sister, "McClellan was a fine general, but can he lead a nation? These are times when we need firm hands guiding our ship.
The end of this war must mean a preserved union and an end to the abomination of slavery. The election turned in Lincoln's favor following a series of Union military victories. Most notably, Sherman's capture of Atlanta, the one I just mentioned. These successes bolstered public confidence in Lincoln's leadership and the possibility of a Union victory. I mean, like a more modern example of why this worked and like aided him would be Osama bin Laden's death in 2011, leading to Obama getting a second term in 2012. I mean, I wouldn't say Obama's reelection was a direct cause, and well, Osama's death was a direct cause for his reelection, but I do think it played a big role in his change or like hope narrative, like those slogans that he used during his second campaign. And so in a very similar way, this helped almost establish Abe as a sort of like hero figure during his campaign. And so when the election results were tallied, Lincoln secured 55% of the popular vote and a landslide in the Electoral College. So yeah, I mean, like even though it was only 55% for the most part, because like a lot of those like split states were split towards in favor of him, he won more of the electoral votes, which was more important. His victory was a clear signal to that the North was committed to seeing the war through to its conclusion and preserving the Union at all costs. Lincoln's re-election was a pivotal moment, affirming the nation's resolve to end the rebellion and abolish slavery. It provided the mandate Lincoln needed to press forward in setting the stage for the war's final act and eventual reunification of a divided nation. And during the same year, in the midst of the Civil War, as the North made gains and became increasingly apparent that the Confederacy would be defeated, the question of how to reintegrate the Southern states into the Union loomed large. So we have the Wade-Davis Bill of 1864. It was an early attempt by the radical, quote-unquote, Republicans in Congress to define the process of Reconstruction, offering a vision that was slightly harsher than President Abraham Lincoln's own plan that he had. Their idea was a 10-step plan that went as follows. Number 1, all Southern slave owners would they themselves become slaves for at least 5 years to aid in the reconstruction of the South. Number 2, while in Reconstruction, former owners' property would be up for sale and would be given to the highest bidder. Number 3, the slave owners that are now slaves would be made to watch as their wives and daughters get married off to their former slaves. They were then to be forced to watch the act of consummating said marriage. Number 4, should the former slave, now turned master, wish it, they would be allowed to make their former master perform any acts necessary to aid and abet in their consummation. They were also permitted to, instead of marriage, allow each of their other former slaves, that were with them, run a train on the former master's wife. Number 5, all Southerners will be forced to drop their weird fucking accent. Number 6, any Southerner caught talking with a Southern drawl in their tone is to be killed on sight. Number 7, all male slave owners will be, after being a slave, then forced into being a gigolo for British royals. Number 8, all of the cutest drummer boys will be freed from their assholes getting rammed by Confederate infantrymen. Number 9, said drummer boys will then be allowed to be rammed by Union soldiers. And number 10, no more iced tea. Obviously, joking. I mean, like that should be clear. I trust you listeners. You're all smart. And I probably didn't make up 10 things and continue that bit for as long as I did, but William Bradford, space vampire, compelled me to do so. So if you don't know who he is, he's the leader of Massachusetts from his secret cave cabal that he runs the government from. He just compelled me to make up some bullshit to, distract you from what they actually wanted. Oh, man. Senators Benjamin Wade of Ohio and Henry Winter Davis of Maryland, both ardent abolitionists and proponents of a strict approach to Reconstruction, crafted the bill. Their legislation proposed that a majority, 50% or more, of white male citizens in a Confederate state would need to swear an ironclad oath of past and future loyalty to the Union before that state could begin the process of rejoining. This contrasted sharply with Lincoln's 10% plan to make that oath, which, again, only required 10% of voters to take a loyalty oath. In a journal entry from Samuel Tillman, a shoekeeper from Pennsylvania, dated July 15th, 1864, highlights the divide about this. He says, "The Wade-Davis bill seems too stringent to my taste. While I wish for the South to pay for its transgressions, I also long for our nation's wounds to heal. The president's approach seems more moderate and more pragmatic. So, a lot of people were calling for a more pragmatic approach. Another integral aspect of the Wade-Davis bill was the process it outlined for drafting new state constitutions. These conventions would exclude any Confederate official or military officer. The bill also demanded the abolition of slavery in the rejoining states. And then Sarah Evers, a teacher in Virginia, wrote in a letter to her cousin, "Many here are distressed by the demand of the Wade-Davis bill. They feel it paints all Southerners with a broad brush, punishing many for the decisions of a few. Though I must admit, I am quite keen on the idea of having a train ran on me. Ooh, it sounds exciting." Fucking, could you imagine? It'd be so funny if that was actually in it. Every Southern male's wife is going to have a train ran on them. That's where the term came from. A Union and freedman train gets ran on Southern belles. Lincoln, recognizing the divisiveness of the bill and preferring his more lenient approach to Reconstruction, chose not to sign the Wade-Davis bill into law. Using a pocket veto, which is by which a president can effectively veto a bill by simply not signing it before Congress adjourns, Lincoln signaled his disapproval of it. The veto infuriated the radical, again, quote-unquote, Republicans, causing a rift between them and the president. They viewed Lincoln's approach as too lenient and believed that the South should be made to undergo a more rigorous process of reconstruction and repentance. "They must be made to suffer like good little boys. Do you know what they did to little Tim, Abe? Did you hear what they came up with? They literally invented a new sexual term for what they did to him. They called it drawn and quartering. Do you have an idea how insane and incomprehensible that is, Abe?" The story of little Tim, truly the tale of a nation. So, the Wade-Davis bill and its subsequent veto marked a crucial moment in early Reconstruction efforts, setting the stage for fierce political battles between the Republicans. They had to fight amongst themselves, causing more tension between the Democrats and Republicans as well, with many of the Democrats almost feeling justified that the Republicans were all radical like that, when in all reality, Lincoln was super fucking moderate. He was like, no, listen, we're not going to be that crazy, but y'all are going to pay. And then in 1865, we have the 13th Amendment. So the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865 was a pivotal moment in American history, formally ending the institution of slavery that had scarred the nation for centuries. Its passage represented not only a legal transformation, but also a moral reckoning. Also, America would not be the last one to end slavery. The actual last people to end slavery would be in 1888 with Brazil, where Brazil is actually the last country in the Americas to outlaw slavery. There's still slavery going on in some European nations. So I should say not in the EU. So not anyone that's part of the UN. I don't think. I'd have to double check on that to make sure I'm right in saying that. But America, wasn't the last. So good on America. They were still pretty late to the party, though. Basically, everyone else had already done it. So, as the Civil War drew to a close, there was a growing recognition among Union leaders that the victory on the battlefield would need to be paired with a permanent end to slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation had already declared freedom for slaves in Confederate territories, but it was a wartime measure that did not address slavery in the broader states or ensure its future abolishment. So, introduced in Congress in 1864, the 13th Amendment faced a challenging journey to ratification. While it passed the Senate relatively quickly, the Senate was pretty much Republican-controlled, the House of Representatives was a different matter. Debates were fiery and intense, with many Democrats opposing the amendment on states' rights grounds or racial prejudices. So stupid. So stupid. In the diary of Clara Beaumont, a suffragette from New York, an entry from January 25th, 1865, really kind of captures this tension here. She says, "The House is bitterly divided on the amendment. While many see the moral imperative, others cling to old prejudices. I pray for that righteousness prevails." So, go her. Go Clara. Abraham Lincoln threw his weight behind the amendment, viewing it as essential to the war's purpose and to the nation's future. His lobbying, combined with changing sentiments in the House, led to its eventual passage on January 31st, 1865.
Again, want to fucking know why people are hung up on this shit? I'm going to repeat this so many times. It's because of those stupid verses in the Bible in Genesis chapter 9 where naked, look at my dick Noah, gets mad at his son for not looking at his dick and covering him up. How asinine is that? That is the justification for a race being condemned to slavery. That's so, I don't know how people came to that conclusion. I don't understand. Like, it makes no fucking sense. More people should have questioned that shit. Whatever. It's like, if you want to take over people, if you want to enslave people, be like the Vikings, enslave every race. You know, don't discriminate. It's not just one race. Everyone should be your slave if you're a Viking. Which, I don't know. Like, slavery is still wrong. I think slavery is not right, but just at the very least, the Vikings didn't fucking just be like, oh yeah, only brown people are slaves. So stupid. Once passed by Congress, the amendment was sent to the states for ratification. By December 6, 1865, it was ratified by the requisite number of states, eventually becoming the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Its concise yet profound text declared, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime. That's right. Slavery was still fine if it was a punishment for crime. Then that'll become a big problem. Whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And here's the main issue with that. It's the fucking crime part. It's like they did away with slavery, but they forgot racist dickheads could still try and convict black people. So, so dumb. And like even today, people in prison, they make a pittance. They make like a penny for like multiple hours of work. So slavery still kind of goes on today in prison systems. I have a lot of problems. I have a lot of issues with those systems that we have set up in the government. So, yeah, I don't know. Privatized prison and privatized anything that's privatized. It just leads to so many goddamn issues and a lot of shit that can get covered up, in my opinion. But anyways, Elijah Thompson, a freed man in Mississippi, wrote in a letter to his son, "Today marks a new dawn, not just for our family, but for countless souls across the land. We are free in the truest sense. But remember, freedom is just the beginning. We must strive for equality and justice every day." Even back then, there's an acknowledgement that there is still going to be a struggle to get the recognition that they deserved as people. I was sad. As the spring of 1865 dawned, the fate of the Confederacy hung in the balance. The relentless pressure applied by Union forces, particularly of the Army of the Potomac, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, had cornered the once proud Army of Northern Virginia. And commanded by General Robert E. Lee, after nearly 4 years of brutal conflict, the Civil War's climactic end was unfolding in the small Virginia town of Appomattox Courthouse. The weeks leading up to the surrender had been trying for Lee's army, lacking supplies, and constantly on the move, and many of their soft, sweet, supple drummer boys now in the possession of the Union Army. They saw an escape route, but Grant's forces pursued relentlessly. On April 9th, 1865, surrounded with no viable path for retreat and no supple drummer boys to fuck, Lee made the fateful decision to meet Grant at the McLean House in Appomattox Courthouse. Lucas Ainsworth, a Union soldier present at the event, jotted in his diary, April 9th, "Today, history was made. Saw Generals Lee and Grant, two giants of this war, meet. The air was thick with tension, but also with respect. Both men knew the weight of this moment." The terms of surrender were generous, reflecting Grant's desire to heal the nation. Confederate soldiers were allowed to keep their horses and return to their homes without fear of prosecution for treason. And that's a big deal. It probably could have been. Officers could keep their sidearms. Grant even arranged for food rations to be given to the famished Confederate troops. Rebecca Caldwell, a local resident of Appomattox, wrote a letter to her sister. "The town is a mix of emotions. There's relief that the fighting is over, but also a deep sadness. I watched as the Confederate soldiers, tears in their eyes, stack their arms, and the weight of defeat is heavy on them." You know, it's like when you fight for something that you really believe in and you think you're justified, or like, let's say you're playing a sport and you've worked your ass off, to get really good at it. And then your pride just gets kick to the curb when someone better than you just comes and whips your ass to that sport. Kind of like that. That was their feeling, just a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And while the surrender at Appomattox Court signaled the de facto end of the Confederacy, small pockets of resistance continued for a few more weeks in other parts of the South. However, Lee's surrender marked a turning point, as he was the commander of the most significant Confederate army. It was pretty much the end here, right? So, in the aftermath, the nation faced the daunting challenge of reconstruction and reconciling the deep divides that had led to the conflict. The war had settled the questions of secession and slavery, but the scars remained, and the struggle for a united and just nation would continue for generations. Which, again, this really marks the end of the war here, right? Doesn't mark the end of the Confederate States, but the end of the war in general. At this point, it just kind of became a manhunt for, rebellion leaders to get caught. And then in 1865, just days after the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, which really should have marked the time of national healing and reconciliation, the United States was plunged into mourning. So on the evening of April 14th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln, seeking a respite from the pressures of office and the weight of guiding a nation through most of its trying time, decided to attend a smut house and get really hammered and bone just so many whores. Like so many whores, and he ended up getting syphilis and would die because of it. Untold American history, but that's what the actual text, like the letters written by Mary Todd, wrote out. And she was the one who actually shot him because of him going to the whorehouse. She was pretty upset by it. No, of course not. Okay, no. He decided to attend a play titled Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The theater was abuzz with the knowledge that the president would be in attendance. I mean, that is a big deal. Could you imagine? I mean, I remember here in Utah when Biden visited, despite, Utah having a certain side of the political spectrum here. Many people definitely weren't as excited, but there were still plenty of people that were pretty stoked about having the president visit. And then right before, we had the guy who went and got killed by the FBI because he decided to make some threats. You don't make threats like that and then have a weapon and then, discharge that weapon with the FBI raiding your house. Goddamn. Anyways. Isabel Montgomery, who was an audience member for the evening, noted in her diary, "The atmosphere was festive. We were all eager for a glimpse of Mr. Lincoln, and little did we know the tragedy that awaited." So as the play progressed, John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, made his way quietly into the president's private theater box. He did that little Assassin's Creed sneak where you kind of blend in with people and shit. He was doing that, except less cool and more fucking dumb because fuck him. Armed with a small Derringer pistol, Booth took advantage of a humorous moment in the play to shoot Lincoln in the back of his head, like a coward. He then leaped onto stage, reportedly shouting "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants," repeating from the play of Julius Caesar, because again, he was an actor. And, he and his tiny dick tried to make an escape because he thought he was so fucking badass for killing the president, by shooting him in the back of his head like a bitch. Anybody that goes and in my opinion, goes and shoots someone in the back of their head unexpectedly and pulls shit like that is a coward in my opinion and doesn't deserve respect at all. So maybe weirdos that respect him for some reason, fuck off. I don't want you listening to my show. You don't deserve to listen to the show if you sympathize with fucking Booth. Anyways, chaos and confusion enveloped the theater. The gravity of the situation became immediately apparent. And Dr. Charles Leal, a young army surgeon present in the audience, rushed to attend to the fallen president. And despite his best efforts, it was clear the wound was mortal. Lincoln was moved to a boarding house across the street, the Peterson House, where he lay in a coma for hours. Henry Sturgis, a resident of the boarding house, penned in a letter. The whole night was a somber vigil. People whispered in hushed tones, praying for a miracle. But as dawn approached, hope faded. Lincoln passed away the next morning on April 15th with his wife Mary and several officials at his side. His last breath marked the first time a sitting U.S. president had been assassinated. Motherfucker took a bullet to the head and still lived for hours, though. And back in those days, that's some wild shit. Abe motherfucking Lincoln, strong ass man. The nation was in shock. Flags flew at half-mast, businesses closed, and spontaneous memorials appeared. For many, the joy of the war's end was overshadowed by profound grief. Booth, meanwhile, was having a grand old time. He was on the run, and an intense manhunt was launched after him. And 12 days later, he was located in a barn in Virginia and killed. Reportedly, when he was found, he tried to talk his way out of it by saying, Lincoln was depressed, guys. I mean, he was totally cool with me doing it. And like, come on, look at him. He was like super like fucked up. You know, like his kid died and shit. And like his mom had died when he was a kid. He was totally fine. Yeah, someone needed to, it was a mercy kill, really. Come on, guys. And of course, no one bought that. And then he claimed that he was under the influence of William Bradford, space vampire, and that he had to do it. You know, John had to do it, which of course the history books would never tell you because the government can't let you know the truth that William Bradford got exactly what he wanted with Abe's death and rules from his dark Massachusetts cave with an iron fist, or something like that. I don't know. Anyone living in Massachusetts, let me know. Let me know where he's at. We'll go on a manhunt together, okay? Lincoln's assassination had profound implications for the nation's future, especially the course of Reconstruction. The man who had steered the country through its darkest days and had dreams of binding its wounds was no longer there to guide it. Instead, a period of turbulence and uncertainty awaited as the nation grappled with Lincoln's legacy and its path forward. But we must ask ourselves, was this really done by an angry, disgruntled actor who is jealous of Abe Lincoln's massive cock? As everyone knows, the natives had nicknamed him Horsecock. Or was this really the doing of William Bradford, immortal space vampire, who pinned it on John Wilkes Booth? Again, textbooks won't tell you the truth. Draw your own conclusions. Don't do any research. Believe what you want to believe. Fucking kidding. Please actually do go read and then draw your own conclusions after doing research. Don't just, believe in a conspiracy. But we may never know, right? We're never going to know for sure. The closing days of the Civil War saw the Confederate government in disarray. With Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, captured by Union forces in early April, President Jefferson Davis, that's right, we're back to good old Jeff Davy, and his cabinet fled south, hoping to regroup and continue the fight. As days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that the Confederate cause was lost. By mid-April, Union forces were in hot pursuit of Davis. With his family and a small escort, he traveled through the Carolinas and into Georgia, attempting to evade capture. There were whispers that Davis sought to flee to Texas or even beyond U.S. shores to regroup and launch a guerrilla war or establish a government in exile. Eleanor Whitman, a Southern sympathizer who had crossed paths with Davis during his flight, wrote in her journal, Met President Davis today. He seemed weary but resolute. Told us to keep faith. The South will rise again, he said, but his eyes, they told a different story. A story of a man who seemed to hunger for the Confederate Army Boy drummers. He too was saddened when they were taken by those Union bastards. I know that when they were taken, the war was truly lost. Our soldiers must be able to come at least twice a day, or they will be weighed down on the battlefield by all that semen built up in their balls. And I can't be there on the battlefield to drain them because I'm a lonely woman. Maybe I could, sneak into camp dressed up as a drummer boy and help alleviate some of those still continuing the fight. Fucking could you imagine? Sorry. On the morning of May 10th, 1865, Davis's run came to an end near Irwinville, Georgia. Union cavalry surrounded a small camp where Davis and his party had bedded down. Despite initial reports and rumors suggesting Davis had been captured while attempting to disguise himself in women's clothing, these accounts were later discredited and were largely seen as Northern attempts to humiliate the Southern leader. So yeah, he didn't actually try and dress up as a woman, but he might have dressed up as a woman because there were no more drummer boys left for his Southern supporters. They had to come twice a day, guys. Come on. Lieutenant James Harper, part of the Union detachment, noted in a letter home, took Davis in custody today, expected a fight, but he came peacefully.
Seems the weight of the Confederacy has worn him down. Looks older than his years. Jefferson Davis was taken prisoner and held for 2 years at Fort Monroe, Virginia. Housed in a casemate, Davis was initially shackled and placed under strict guard. Over time, his treatment softened, largely due to public sentiment and concerns for his declining health. He just looked pitiful and miserable at that point, and a lot of people did buy into the narrative that he had dressed up as a woman, and so they were thinking that he was crazy. Yeah, because, ever heard of the Greeks before who used to love dressing up as women? Or the Japanese who were totally doing it too back then. But whatever. The question of how to deal with Davis was a contentious one. Many in the North clamored for a treason trial, believing that a conviction would finally lay to rest any notions of secession's legality. Because they didn't want states to be able to, secede anymore. However, there were also fears that such a trial could produce an acquittal, which would be a political disaster. In the end, Davis was released in May 1867 on bail, with several wealthy Northerners, including Horace Greeley, contributing to his bond. The case for treason against him was eventually dropped, and he was never tried. Post-imprisonment, Davis traveled abroad before settling in the U.S. He wrote a 2-volume defense of the Confederate cause titled The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. Despite his controversial legacy, Davis's capture and imprisonment symbolized the definitive end of the Confederate leadership and closing chapter of the Civil War. So, this would be the true end, right, to the complete Civil War here. This is, at this point, there's no more Confederate leadership. No one gives a fuck. It's all dismantled. But after this, we do need to take a look at the complete aftermath of things that would happen here, so we can truly understand why Democrats and Republicans would flip in their Federalist and anti-Federalist leanings in the 20th century. And we'll be doing that. We'll be going over the 20th century part of this theory next episode. But we're going to continue here with the 19th century for a bit. So in the aftermath of the Civil War, as the ashes of the conflict began to settle, the United States faced the daunting task of reintegrating the rebellious southern states and addressing the needs of millions of newly freed African Americans. Recognizing the immense challenges ahead, Congress established the Bureau of Refugees, freedmen, and abandoned lands, more commonly known as the Freedmen's Bureau, in March 1865. The primary mission of the Freedmen's Bureau was to offer assistance to former slaves and impoverished whites in the southern states. Its creation was not just a nod to the immediate humanitarian crisis, but an acknowledgement of the long-term societal challenges that emancipation posed. Jeremiah Hamilton, a freedman in Mississippi, wrote in a letter to a northern cousin, "The Bureau is like a light in the dark for us. They help with food, they help us find work, they make sure we're treated right. It ain't perfect, but it's hope." Under the leadership of General Oliver Otis Howard, the Bureau's tasks were expansive. They provided food and medical care, helped reunite families torn apart by slavery, negotiated labor contracts between former slaves and white landowners, and most importantly, established schools for Black Americans. For many freed slaves, the opportunity was to receive an education and learn how to read and write was a monumental step towards empowerment and self-determination. That was huge. It was huge to do that. But you want to know what was really fucked up? Those contracts between former slaves and white landowners basically made them slaves again for a little bit. But they got paid, kind of. But then they could have things taken out of their pay, like, oh, I fed you today. That's being taken out of your pay. Oh, I did this today. That's being taken out of your pay. It's so fucked up. So fucked up. However, the Bureau faced immense challenges. I'm talking widespread racism, political opposition, and lack of funds and personnel hampered its efforts. Many white Southerners viewed the Bureau with suspicion, seeing it as a manifestation of Northern control. Violent groups like the the Ku Klux Klan or the Cool Kids Club, with a K, fucking dickwads, frequently targeted Bureau workers and the freedmen they served. Lucy Peterson, a teacher from Pennsylvania, who went south to teach in a freedmen's school, penned in her diary, "The resentment here is palpable. Our school was burned last week, but the children came the next day, sitting on the charred remains, eager to learn. Their spirits kept me going."
Fucking depressing. Oh, God. Also, I know the Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1866 and this is 1865, but, violent groups like them, before they were called the Ku Klux Klan was forming. So before they had a name, they all got together and, sucked each other off, basically. Wild. So, in the wake of Lincoln's assassination in 1865, Vice President Andrew Johnson was thrust into the role of the presidency during one of the most tumultuous times in American history. As the country grappled with the scars of the Civil War and the challenges of reintegrating the South, the nation watched intently to see how Johnson would handle Reconstruction. Johnson, a Southern Democrat who had remained loyal to the Union during the Civil War, believed in a lenient approach towards the Southern states. He believed that the Southern states had never legally left the Union and should be readmitted as quickly as possible. His plan for presidential Reconstruction offered a broad amnesty to most Southerners who took an oath of allegiance to the Union. Only Confederate leaders and wealthy planters, those with taxable property worth over more than $20,000 at the time, were required to obtain a presidential pardon. In a letter to a close confidant, Johnson wrote, "The South needs a hand of reconciliation, not the boot of conquest. We must bind the nation's wounds swiftly." However, this leniency was met with fierce opposition by the radical Republicans in Congress, who viewed Johnson's approach as too forgiving. It's a good idea to get everybody reintegrated as quickly as possible, but I don't know. It kind of leads to them thinking they can still do whatever the fuck they want. They were concerned that without substantial reforms, the old Southern aristocracy would regain control and the rights of the newly freed Black Americans would be trampled upon. And they were fucking right. They were. Thaddeus Stevens, a leading radical Republican, expressed his dissatisfaction in a speech, saying, "Under Johnson's plan, the rebels returned to their seats in Congress as if nothing had happened. The blood of our boys demands more than this." Which I agree with in a very strong sense. Indeed, Johnson's lenient policies led to the rise of black codes in the South. These were restrictive laws designed to limit the freedom of African Americans and ensure their availability as a cheap labor force. The black codes enraged many in the North who felt they were a blatant attempt to reinstate a form of slavery. Harriet Jacobs, a former slave and activist, wrote in a letter, "We have been unshackled only to be chained again by these codes. Freedom without rights is no freedom at all." Fucking right, Harriet. The clash between Johnson and the radical Republicans reached its zenith when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, aiming to nullify the black codes and affirm the rights of Black Americans. Johnson vetoed the bill. Fucking racist dick. But Congress overrode his veto, marking the first time in U.S. history that a major piece of legislation became law over a presidential veto. Fucking good. The tensions between Johnson and Congress continued to escalate, laying the groundwork for his eventual impeachment in 1868. While Johnson's vision of Reconstruction was rooted in leniency and quick reunification, the radical Republicans, I don't even really call them radical at this point, just the Republicans, the people who knew what the fuck the South was up to, saw a more transformative and punitive approach to ensure the rights and safety of African Americans in the post-war South. The friction between these visions underscored the profound challenges of rebuilding a nation torn apart by civil conflict. Okay. And then in 1865, and we kind of already went over this, we're going to go over the black codes, though. So these black codes would vary from state to state, but shared a common goal. They preserved white supremacy. That was the whole goal of them. And they also ensured a subservient labor force. They imposed severe restrictions on black people's rights to own property, conduct business, move freely, and access the legal system. Everything you need to do if you were free, they couldn't really do, even though they were free. For instance, many of the codes forbade black individuals from owning guns, purchasing land, or even moving freely by implementing strict vagrancy laws. Like, you're out past dock, so now I'm going to put you in prison because you're breaking a law. And then they could enslave them again if they broke a law. A former slave from Mississippi, Samuel Jenkins, described the impact of these laws in a personal account. "Freedom," they said, "but every step I take, there's a law telling me where I can go, what I can do, how I can work. Feels like the chains never really came off." fucking true. One of the most egregious aspects of the Black Codes was the introduction of the apprenticeship systems. Under this guise, black children could be forcibly separated from their families and made to work in conditions that closely mirrored slavery. They could forcibly separate children. These laws also allowed for the arrest and subsequent hiring out of black individuals for minor infractions, a system that led to forced labor and brutal conditions. Again, they just restarted slavery again, essentially. The North, especially the Republicans in Congress, reacted with outrage to the Black Codes. They saw them as a blatant defiance of the Union's war aims and an attempt to reinstate a racial hierarchy barely distinguishable from antebellum slavery. Just exactly what it was. Boston New Paper editor opined, the gallant men of the North did not shed their blood to replace the chains of slavery with the shackles of the Black Codes. Very well put. The Black Codes played a significant role in shaping the direction of Reconstruction. In response to these repressive laws, Congress would pass the Civil Rights Act and later the 14th Amendment to ensure civil rights. And so let's go ahead and get into that. So, in the wake of the Civil War with the Southern states enacting the restrictive Black Codes, it became glaringly evident that something needed to be done to protect the rights of the newly freed Black Americans. So, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 emerged as one of the most revolutionary pieces of legislation in American history. At its core, the act aimed to ensure that all persons born in the United States, regardless of race or previous condition of servitude, were recognized as citizens. The pivotal law went on to grant all citizens full and equal benefit of all laws and proceedings for the security of person and property. It was a monumental stride towards equality, making the federal government's assertion over states in determining and protecting the civil rights of its citizens. So you're going to see this a lot between racist dickheads and people who aren't racist who recognize, oh shit, yeah, and this is wrong, where they're going to essentially go back and forth and finding new ways to, really the racist assholes are going to find new ways to try and fuck over the laws that get made in response to their actions. Senator Lyman Trumbull of Illinois, one of the key sponsors of the bill, described its significance during a Senate debate. He said, "This act seeks to break the chains of discrimination. It pronounces all men equal in the eyes of the law." However, the journey of this legislation was fraught with challenges. President Andrew Johnson, who had already been shown leniency, again, he hasn't been impeached yet. We'll get into that. It's in 1868 when he gets impeached, but because we're still here. So, anyways, had already shown leniency for the South and disregard for the rights of black men. He vetoed it. He argued that it went beyond the powers of Congress and infringes upon states' rights. Again, because he was a fucking Democrat or a anti-federalist. Anti-federalists did not believe in telling states what the fuck to do. And so that is the only reason why, that and he was a racist dickhead, that this shit happened. A journal entry from Congressman John Farnsworth captures the tensions of the time. April 6, 1866. The president's veto came as no surprise, but it did ignite a fire in our chambers. The debate was heated, but the cause was just, which it was. The determination of Congress was unwavering. Both houses overrode Johnson's veto, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 became law. It was the first time in U.S. history that this was passed over presidential veto. It wouldn't be the last time, but it was the first time. So it did lay the groundwork for the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which sought to further cement these principles into the very fabric of American law. It was a clear message to the states, particularly those in the South. The federal government would not stand idle while they sought to trample on the rights of their black citizens. In a letter to his family, a black veteran of the Civil War named Elijah Turner wrote, "This act gives me hope. It tells me that our fight, our sacrifice, it meant something, that this country might yet live up to its promises." Those promises being freedom and equality and justice for all men, regardless of back when it was written, they didn't add it into the Constitution, but they really meant white men when they wrote it because, fucking dickheads. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was more than just a legislative act. It was the declaration of the nation's commitment to equality, even if the road to achieving it remained long and fraught with obstacles that racist assholes kept making. Okay. And now we're to where the Ku Klux Klan gets founded. So in the turbulent aftermath of everything, the Southern landscape was rife with social upheaval and deep-seated resentment. They were, a little butthurt about, getting their asses kicked. The scars of defeat combined with the fear of a shifting racial hierarchy, because they were thinking, the blacks were going to take over. They're going to take our jobs. They're going to be better than me. That was their main scare. It was just they're going to lose. Really, it was just them realizing, maybe white people aren't better than black people, and they were scared to admit that. No one wants to be wrong, but man, when you're that wrong and you lean that hard into it, that pride getting ripped out of you it would hurt. And so the scars of defeat would lead to the emergence of a menacing organization that would become synonymous with hate and terror, the Ku Klux Klan or the KKK. Founded in 1866 in Pulaski, Tennessee. All you people from Tennessee, I bet you know that. The Klan started ostensibly as a social club for Confederate veterans. However, it quickly metamorphosed into a oh my God, I can speak English. And whatever, turned into a violent white supremacist group hell-bent on maintaining white dominance in the post-war South. The group's main objective was to resist the efforts of Reconstruction, particularly the integration and empowerment of formerly enslaved Black Americans. They hated that. Their tactics were insidious. Cloaked in their infamous white robes and hoods, members of the KKK embarked on a reign of terror. They intimidated, assaulted, and murdered Black citizens and their white allies. Their acts of violence were not random. They were targeted attacks meant to dissuade Black individuals from voting, seeking office, or simply asserting their rights as free people. A journal entry from Ella Simmons, a black school teacher in Alabama, captures the atmosphere of fear. June 20th, 1867. The night riders came again. They burned the Johnson's barn, and it's their message telling us to know our place, but we won't be silenced, not after all we've been through. While the Klan claimed to be the voice of the silent South, it was clear they were anything but silent. They aimed to loudly and violently reverse the hard-won gains made during Reconstruction. Their actions spoke volumes about the deep-rooted resistance to racial equality in the South. Again, because of that stupid fucking verse in Genesis. Their only justification. So dumb. Anyways. It wasn't just Black communities that were targets. White Republicans and those who came south to assist in Reconstruction, often derogatorily referred to as carpetbaggers, very creative name, fucking assholes, were also in the Klan's crosshairs. The group sought to dismantle any semblance of progress or collaboration between races. They would also take steps even further and began to recapture the drummer boys that were taken by the Union during the war and forced them back into their weird group orgies. They even rewrote a famous Christmas song sung during the holidays and would force the drummer boys to sing it. This is how it went.
They told me, come. A brand new clock to squeeze, come. The finest house we bring, come. To lay before the come.
So, if you want to enjoy the rest of that, that'll be at the end of the episode after the end music credits. So, man, I just after I found out about the whole drummer boy thing, I could not get out of my head while I was writing this. I'm like, but it makes sense that a group of Confederate soldiers would totally go re-kidnap their drummer boys just to fuck them. Anyways, the federal government, recognizing the threat that the KKK posed, to the nation's stability and progress of Reconstruction, took steps to combat the group. The enforcement acts of the early 1870s, particularly the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, were passed to suppress Klan violence and protect the civil rights of all citizens. In a letter to his colleague, Senator Charles Sumner wrote, the so-called chivalrous knights of the Klan are but cowards lurking in the shadows. We must shine a light on this darkness and put an end to the reign of terror. The Ku Klux Klan, with its foundational tenets of hate and intolerance, represented one of the darkest chapters in American history. Yet it also underscored the resilience and determination of black communities in the South, who, despite facing such terror, continued to strive for a better and more equitable future. And the Ku Klux Klan would kind of be turned into a joke by Dave Chappelle. And no, like seriously, like Dave Chappelle really did do a lot of damage to their image with his black white supremacist bit that he did. Big props to him. Seriously, he is one of the inspirations I had for wanting to get into comedy. I love his work. Don't agree with all of his political views, of course. There are certain views that I don't agree with him on. I shouldn't even say political views, but some of his societal stances he's taken. But he's kind of taken more of a nuanced approach to it, just kind of more or less just pointing out the ridiculousness of some people in certain communities. And I can see that, but I can also see where some of those communities will feel like it's hate mongering in a way. But that's a complicated issue that I'm not here to really get into. I like his humor. I like his stuff. I think he definitely deserved the Pulitzer Prize for his work that he's done. So, is it the Mark Twain? Or I don't know. So I remember he got an award for his work, and I was like, yeah, no, that guy deserves, out of a lot of comedians, he 100% deserved that recognition for what he did. So, okay, and then in 1867, we have the Reconstruction Acts, right? We've kind of been hinting at this, kind of going over some of it, but these are going to divide the South into military districts, and they would set the terms for readmission into the Union. So amidst the wreckage left by the Civil War and the Southern resistance to integrating newly emancipated Black Americans into civic life, Congress undertook one of the most significant legislative initiatives in U.S. history, the Reconstruction Acts. This series of laws would fundamentally reshape the South and dictate the terms of its readmission into the Union. Comprised of several statutes, the Reconstruction Acts essentially laid out a roadmap for how the formerly rebellious states could reintegrate into the Union. One of the most notable features was the division of the South into 5 military districts, each governed by a Union general. This measure was seen by many as a necessary response to the pervasive violence and intimidation tactics being used against Black Americans and their allies. Unfortunately, a lot of the Union generals also still kind of racist, so they didn't give as much of a shit. Beyond the military provisions, these acts also set forth prerequisites for the Confederate States before they could be readmitted. Central to this was the stipulation that they needed to draft new state constitutions. These new governing documents had to enfranchise Black men, a radical departure from pre-war norms. The words of Representative Thaddeus Stevens, a staunch radical Republican, an advocate for Black rights, underscored the act's importance. He said, These laws are not just about punishment. They are about rectification. The South must be reconstructed in both spirit and law. For many Southerners, particularly ex-Confederates, the presence of federal troops and the mandate to rewrite their constitutions were seen as a bitter pill to swallow. Diary entries from the time frequently reference a sense of humiliation. One such entry from a former Confederate officer read, March 19th, 1867. Our once proud South is now under the boot of the Northern Army. They say it's for our own good, but it feels like subjugation. And it feels like subjugation mainly because we still do not have our drummer boys. Though the Klan's attempts to get them back have been all but in vain, they were able to round up a few, and we were able to enjoy them for a night, it seemed. Yet for Black communities in the South, the Reconstruction Acts represented a beacon of hope. They saw in these laws the possibility of not only political participation, but also of genuine equality. A letter to a northern relative, a freedman in Mississippi, wrote, These acts, they are our lifeline. For the first time, I feel like a true citizen of this country. There are multiple letters that kind of pen the same sentiment. They feel like, someone actually gives a shit about me. But it wasn't enough of a shit, sadly. So, however, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Reconstruction era was fraught with challenges, both politically and socially. White supremacist groups
like the aforementioned Ku Klux Klan, vehemently opposed these reforms. Violent resistance and eventual pushback from these so-called redeemers would stymie many of the act's goals. Nevertheless, these acts remain as a testament to the nation's overall efforts, however flawed and however resisted it was, to rebuild itself and extend the promises of democracy to all of its citizens, not just white people. So, it signified a commitment enshrined in law to address the egregious wrongs of slavery and forge a path towards a more inclusive America. And then, in 1868, we get the 14th Amendment. This is probably the biggest step forward that they had ever taken. So it grants equal protection under law and solidifies rights for former slaves. So the landscape of the American constitutional law is going to be completely transformed with this ratification, aimed at rectifying the deep-seated injustices and its immediate aftermath of slavery, of the era of slavery and then its immediate aftermath. The amendment would go on to become one of the most consequential additions to the U.S. Constitution. Its primary section, Section 1, contains some of the most profound and far-reaching language in the entire Constitution. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. But of course, the South would try to find sneaky ways around that shit, right? So at its core, the 14th Amendment was designed to overturn the infamous Dred Scott decision of 1857, which had declared that black individuals could not be citizens by firmly establishing the citizenship of all individuals born or naturalized in the U.S. The amendment sought to close the door on such discriminatory rulings. Actually, what allows immigrants to come over here, have a kid, and that kid becomes a U.S. citizen now is because of the 14th Amendment. So, that's cool. It's good. It was a good step, really good step. So, furthermore, the amendment's promise of equal protection under the laws and its due process clause would come to serve as foundational pillars in numerous landmark Supreme Court decisions ranging from desegregation to LGBTQ plus rights. That's right. 14th Amendment helped not just the black community, but the LGBTQ plus crowd, which is awesome. So a journal entry from a former enslaved man in Georgia captures the sentiment of the moment. July 28th, 1868. Today, I am not just a man, I am a citizen. The laws of this land now see me, truly see me. My children will grow in a world where they are recognized from birth, not as property, but as rightful members of this nation. So as like a fellow fucking human. God, that's all they wanted. That's why is that so hard for some people? I don't know. Even growing up in that culture, I feel like even if I grew up there, part of me would know how wrong that is. And I still don't fucking understand how these people were able to justify slavery to themselves. Besides like, oh, it's a way of life. This is how I make my living. I'm like, fuck you. Go find another way to make a living. God damn. Whatever. Even I should say though, while the 14th Amendment was a monumental stride towards justice, it was not without its detractors. Many southern states initially balked at its ratification. It was only the pressure of the Reconstruction Acts, which conditioned readmission to the Union on the adoption of the amendment, that coerced them into compliance. Legit the only way that this shit was getting passed. So a Virginia lawmaker, in a letter to a friend, lamented. He said, "This amendment is the final blow, ensuring that the old ways of the South are truly dead. But I fear what may rise in their place. I fear that I may never be able to enjoy the sweet stench of a drummer boy's pussy." Over time, the 14th Amendment has proven its enduring significance. Beyond its initial intent to protect the rights of former slaves, it has been invoked in countless court cases, solidifying its role as a crucial guardian of civil liberties. While the journey to true equality remains ongoing, it really does remain ongoing here in the U.S., the 14th Amendment stands as a testament to America's capacity to grow, change, and strive for a more just society, which is a good thing. Think about it, guys. We went from fucking Puritan hate groups to the 14th Amendment. That is a pretty big step.
And we also went from slavery to the 14th Amendment. Again, big steps for America here. It's a good time. Good time. Too bad the South sucked back then. I actually kind of like Texas now. Texas isn't too bad. I've been to parts of Louisiana. Not too bad. So, all right. And then in 1868, we also have Johnson's impeachment. We're finally here, guys. We made it to his impeachment. So the turbulent years following the Civil War saw not only vast social and political changes, as I've mentioned, but also the impeachment of a sitting president. Fucking crazy here. So in 1868, Andrew Johnson, 17th president of the United States, found himself at the epicenter of a constitutional storm, with his very tenure in office hanging by a thread. Andrew Johnson, as a Southern Democrat, had ascended to the presidency following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. His approach to the Reconstruction deeply diverged from that of the Republican-dominated Congress. There is a theory, or really conspiracy, that he may have approached John Wilkes Booth and paid him to assassinate Abraham Lincoln so that he could take over and ensure Southern states, leniency during this time. I'm just kidding. Actually, there might be. I'm going to start that conspiracy. That's my conspiracy. He totally did that. He orchestrated his assassination, just like Lyndon B. Johnson did with the FBI or the CIA or whatever. Anyways, while Congress aimed for a comprehensive reconstruction of the South, ensuring rights for the newly freed black populations, Johnson's leniency towards the former Confederate states and his opposition to significant civil rights advancements led to numerous clashes. The crux of the impeachment, however, was the Tenure of Office Act, passed by Congress in 1867. This law was designed to restrict the president's power to remove certain office holders without Senate approval. Johnson, viewing it as an infringement on his presidential powers, defied it by dismissing Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and appointing Lorenzo Thomas as his replacement. This act of defiance was the last straw for many in Congress. The House of Representatives swiftly voted to impeach Johnson, bringing 11 charges against him, the majority of which revolved around the violation of the Tenure of Office Act that they had just passed. They're like, hey, so, you just went against this, buddy. Fuck you. An entry from a congressman's diary at the time captured the heightened atmosphere in Washington. On February 24th, 1868, he said, "The Capitol is a cauldron of whispers and debates. Johnson's audacity has been met with our resolve. The presidency and Congress are in an unparalleled contest of wills right now." So, that's great. The subsequent trial in the Senate was a spectacle that gripped the nation. The galleries were packed, and the nation waited with bated breath as arguments were presented. In the end, Johnson escaped removal from office by a single vote. The final tally was 35 votes for conviction and 19 against, just shy of the required 2/3 majority. Crazy. Senator James Grimes, a Republican from Iowa, justified his vote for acquittal, stating, "I cannot agree to destroy the harmonious working of the Constitution for the sake of getting rid of an unacceptable president." Which makes no sense to me. It's like, that would be the harmonious working with the Constitution if you get rid of him. If you get rid of someone who's being unharmonious. Whatever, James Grimes. The repercussions of Johnson's impeachments were manifold. For one, it set a significant precedent about the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches, emphasizing the gravity of the impeachment process. It would be over a century before another president, Bill Clinton, would face impeachment proceedings again. That's right. Yeah, it'd be like a whole other 100 years before that shit would go down ever again. Andrew Johnson is an asshole. Okay, and then 1869, we have the 15th Amendment. This is the other big amendment that happens here. It prohibits the denial of voting rights based on race. This is very important. So, just 4 years after the Civil War's end, the United States would again bore witness to transformative change in its foundational law. Passage of the 15th Amendment. This amendment, the third of the Reconstruction Amendments, struck at the very heart of former Confederate states. It attempts to disenfranchise Black Americans and aimed to guarantee the right to vote to every man, irrespective of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That's right. They had to include that because they're like, well, they were my slave during this time, so are they really a citizen? And that was like the argument that was being used. Crazy. Wild. It's like, I don't know, were they born here? And they're like, no, but like he was a slave technically, and like his family was born on a boat, so like the family wasn't from here. And like it's dumb. It was dumb justification just to keep fucking over people. The amendment's passage was not without struggle. While the 13th and 14th Amendments had respectively abolished slavery and granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to all persons. Oh my gosh, stop yawning. Okay. The specific right to vote was still vulnerable to state interventions and legal gymnastics. Very, very bendy here. Many southern states were devising ways to circumvent the spirit of these new laws, aiming to suppress the black vote through methods like poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright intimidation. Yeah, you could just bully someone into not voting. That was their thought. Fucking assholes. Against this backdrop, the push for the 15th Amendment was seen as essential. It was the final piece in a triad of amendments meant to reshape the nation in the post-slavery era. And we have another journal entry from a black activist in Mississippi at the time, which really, it showed us like how excited they were for this shit. November 12th, 1869. Today we stand at the cusp of true freedom. To vote is to have a voice, to shape our land's destiny. No longer shall we be silenced. Tomorrow's dawn is ours to greet as true citizens. Again, they feel like they're actually being treated like people in the country. They're not being treated like property anymore. Ah, man, I just, the South. White people, you suck. We sucked for a long time, man. We did. And it's okay to admit it. I don't feel personal. I guess, I don't feel like it's my fault, of course, that this happened. I know it's not, but I can look back at history at events like these and be like, you cringe a little bit and you're like, oh man, like, why the fuck? That's how I feel. That's how I feel about a lot of the shit that goes on here. Anyways, the amendment's journey was fraught. While it found ample support among the Republicans and abolitionists, others, including some women's rights activists, that's right, some women's rights activists felt betrayed that the amendment did not also address the issue of women's suffrage. Susan B. Anthony expressed her disappointment, noting, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will ask for the ballot for the black man and not for the woman." It's like, like, yeah, it's shitty. It's shitty that women do not get the right to vote. But did you have to say that, Susan? You should have just been happy that they, are gonna get the right to vote too. And I don't know. I just kind of felt like she was kind of sniding at the race there, the African Americans. It's I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that sentiment of the well. I'm mad because I'm not getting what I want, so they shouldn't be able to get what they want. Like, fuck you. Like, that everyone should be allowed to vote. So I don't know. It was weird. It's a weird feeling that happened from Susan B. Anthony, who is very, yay, women's suffrage. Sorry, it's just, ugh. Anyways, when ratified in 1870, the 15th Amendment was celebrated by many as a triumphant conclusion to the era's constitutional changes. Parades and gatherings erupted in cities. It was a cause to celebrate, man. With newly enfranchised black voters proudly marching, flags waving, jubilant in their newly affirmed right. Which is cool. However, as history would demonstrate, the amendment's intent and its practice would often diverge. Southern states, resistant to the changes, more than resistant, they fucking hated the changes, would find alternative means to suppress black votes for decades to come. Practices like the aforementioned poll taxes, literacy tests, and the establishment of the Jim Crow laws. But in its essence, the 15th Amendment was a bold declaration of what America aspired to be, a nation where every citizen, regardless of the color of their skin, had an equal say in its democratic process, unless you had a pussy. Because, that makes sense. And marked another step in the nation's ongoing journey towards its own ideal of liberty and justice for all. Again, unless you had a pussy. Because, again, fuck you if you have a pussy, apparently. But that brings us to the end of today's historical quarrel. All right. That ends the Civil War, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a review. Let me know what you thought exactly of it. Give me an honest review. I don't want to just be like, hey, give me 5 stars because I think I deserve 5 stars. Give me your honest opinion of the show. Tell me what I think I deserve, or what you think I deserve, not what I think I deserve. Because what I think I deserve is I'm much more critical of myself than many people should be, and I need to take my own advice sometimes and just let myself be okay with fucking up. So in review, my takeaway from today's episode is how fucking insane the Civil War was in its sheer scale and all the events that happened into it. I know we didn't go over like every single battle, but we did go over quite a few. And my other big takeaway is holy fuck, they fucked drummer boys. So that comes from like a book written called like Sex During the Civil War or something. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but oftentimes the men would during because they outnumbered the women during the time, and there weren't a lot of women around when they were traveling, they would resort to fucking their drummer boys, and it would be a grand old time. And well, after I read that while researching for the episode, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be what I talk about all the time. And I'm sorry if it was a bit much. I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I was like, man, it would just be hilarious if like everyone seemed to have an issue with the men not being able to bang the drummer boys. And then the drawn and quartering for like a 5-sum, that should be a new name. If that is not already a name or like sexual lingo, let's totally make that sexual lingo, guys. Get drawn and quartered tonight if you like doing that. Okay, go have fun. Other than that, other takeaways would be how fucking weaselly the South would be after they lose, and just like constantly just trying to get around what the Republicans tried to establish. And then it didn't help that fucking Lincoln died, and so he had Johnson pulling his shit while they were trying to, after the Union won, Johnson was like a sympathizer. And fuck, dude. Could you imagine how much smoother things would have been if Lincoln was still president during that time? Probably would have been a lot easier for Congress and the Senate to get some shit passed and make sure the states weren't fucking around with that. But yeah. And I'm sorry if I clearly did not present an unbiased view of the Civil War today. If you were hoping for that, I did explain in my first episode, or part 1 of this series, that wasn't happening. I'm not going to provide bias for something that is clearly wrong and morally wrong, in my opinion. And you may try and argue that the southern states didn't fight for the right to have slavery, that they just, fought for the right to self-govern. But no. They fought for the right to self-govern so they could protect slavery still. Are you kidding me? It was a large economic base for them. Insane to argue that they weren't fighting for slavery. I hate that argument, and I think that you might not be a racist. I'm not going to say that, but fuck, dude, you need to go read up on the Civil War again. Because while it may seem like they were just mad that the central government was asserting too much power, in all reality, they were mad that some of their ways of life were getting restricted. The Southern Pride, fucking Southern Pride Month. That's why I'm like having them fuck their drummer boys, because fuck them. Like, I don't know. Yeah, goddamn. Not to like bash on homosexuality at all. Like, homosexuality is cool too. I don't know. The image of these southern racist assholes just getting butt fucked or like railed. I don't know why, but it just kind of makes me giggle a little bit, because like it's something they would so clearly hate, and like hate to be, caught up in, that it's funny to me, because like it's the exact opposite. I don't know, because they also hate it on the LGBTQ community. So that is why that's there. It's not because I'm hating on homosexuality and think it's weird. It's because of how much they would hate it. And so that's why I'm like, yeah, they're going to rail the drummer boys. In case anyone was confused on that, I just felt like I needed to clarify a bit. But yeah, again, I don't know. I love doing the show, guys. Next week we're going to be going over the 20th century events up to these Martin Luther King, yeah, that's going to be a good one. Probably go over some women's suffrage too, because that will be instrumental for the Black community as well as the women's suffrage movement. And then we'll have kind of like it'll be like a, not as an intense brick way. I'll explain how the Democrats and the Republicans will shift during FDR's time from being Southern and Northern. And so how that flipped happened, which, I don't know, finding that out while researching was kind of cool. It was super interesting to me because, you know, when you read up on like how the Republicans started and like see where they're at now, and part of that too also wasn't just FDR. It was a big part of that too was Nixon. Nixon was big into getting Southern Democrats on his side by appealing to their ideologies. So, yeah, guys, let me know what you want to see in future episodes. Send an email to historicalquarrels@gmail.com and just talk to me. I want to talk to you guys. I want to get to know you guys. I'm planning on trying to do some merch soon. So maybe the first merch will be William Bradford Space Vampire. Who knows? I've not heard anyone say they hate that bit, but you guys might. I don't know. The 20th century episode that I have penned out right now and like where I'm placing some of those reoccurring bits is going to be funny. I may have tracked William Bradford's exact location down, guys. Okay. We're all going to go hunting for him in the cave in Massachusetts. Yeah, no, man, this is so fun. I have so much fun doing this. You have no idea. Well, you probably do have an idea if you do a podcast, but it's just, thank you guys so much for listening and giving a shit about it. It means so much to me because this is seriously, it's like, you know, when you have like a creative itch and you just need to go make something. I get to do that with this. I get to go write something. I get to go be dumb. I get to be myself and I get to have fun during this. I'm not like, work makes me feel like I have to act a certain way my day-to-day life, and it's not who I am, man. I try to be as real as I can be at work, but when you're dealing with a bunch of different people and a bunch of different clients, you have to be a chameleon, and this podcast allows me to not be a chameleon and just take the mask off and be free and as goofy and as weird as I am. I get to be free and goofy, and I'm so glad that there's quite a few of you that have enjoyed my weird, goofy self that I used to get made fun of as a kid for. So that means a lot, because that weird kid maybe, you know, had a hard time making friends as, you know, growing up. Maybe not too hard of a time. I made friends, but like as a kid, I always was afraid of like what people would think if they, you know, experienced the real me. And I think that's a normal fear that a lot of us have. And for you guys to come in, listen to this and enjoy it and not be, not be put off by me. I'm just grateful for that. So, yeah, you guys have a good one. Keep on spreading the quarrels, spread the violence, or I don't know. We can come up with the term later, figure out something to call it, but you guys do what you do. Love you all. Bye. there come. I swallowed it. I swallowed it so much. Lots of pumpkin. I like it very deep to pumpkin. I have only my house to bring pumpkin. That's it for the cave fucking cave pumpkin. Shall I swallow your tum-pa-rum-pa-bum-bum? Put in my bum. Would you like it in my bum? Gary nodded, rum-pa-bum-bum. He and Steve would fuck my bum-pa-rum-bum-cum. I sucked dicks for them, rum-pa-bum-bum. I fucked my best for him, rum-pa-bum-bum, rum-pa-bum-bum, rum-pa-bum-bum. Then he smiled at me, rum-pa-bum-cum. In their cum. Yeah, that's right. In their cum, guys. Be in their fucking cum. They were coming so much. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Fuck your drummer boys.